Hunting grounds promise solitude, challenge, and a primal thrill, but for some, they become a nightmare. One wrong move, one shadow out of place, and the forest turns from serene to sinister. In the wild, the line between predator and prey blurs fast. In this video, we reveal 6 chilling true stories of hunts gone wrong, from a sudden bear charge in Montana to a frostbitten standoff in Alaska. These aren't just outdoor mishaps, they're raw, harrowing survival tales from the edge of the wilderness. In early November 2023, the Bitterroot Mountains of western Montana stretched endlessly under a canopy of snow-dusted pines and frost-covered ridges. This remote wilderness, carved by ancient glaciers and shaped by centuries of harsh winters, had witnessed countless hunting expeditions. The region's reputation for massive elk herds during rutting season drew experienced hunters from across the continent, though the terrain demanded respect and careful planning. Raymond Tucker, a 52-year-old former Marine-turned-backcountry guide, understood these mountains better than most. His weathered hands bore the scars of decades spent navigating dense timberland, and his keen eyes had tracked countless animals through these very forests. Tucker had built his reputation on meticulous preparation and unwavering adherence to safety protocols that had kept him alive through numerous expeditions. That weekend, Tucker had brought his nephew, Kevin Holtz, a 27-year-old accountant from Billings, on what was meant to be an educational elk rifle hunt. Holtz had expressed interest in learning the family tradition of hunting, and Tucker viewed this as an opportunity to pass down skills he had refined over decades of wilderness experience. The morning of November 5th dawned crisp and clear, with temperatures hovering around 28 degrees Fahrenheit. Tucker had planned their route meticulously, marking waypoints on his GPS and briefing Holtz on emergency procedures. The pair had established their base camp near a known elk corridor, where Tucker had observed substantial activity during previous seasons. Just after sunrise, as golden light filtered through the pine canopy, Tucker heard what he believed to be an elk bugle echoing from a steep canyon approximately half a mile east of their position. The sound was convincing enough to trigger his hunting instincts, even though it seemed unusually persistent and rhythmic. Tucker later admitted that the call had an almost irresistible quality that overrode his usual caution. Against his own established protocols, Tucker made the decision that would nearly end his life. He informed Holtz that he intended to investigate the source of the bugling alone, reasoning that a single hunter could move more quietly through the dense undergrowth. Holtz expressed concern about the separation, but Tucker's confidence and experience justified the deviation from their planned approach. Tucker descended into the canyon, following what he assumed was a satellite bull deeper into increasingly treacherous terrain. The canyon walls rose steeply on both sides, lined with loose shale that shifted underfoot with each step. The undergrowth became denser as he progressed, creating natural blinds that limited visibility to mere yards in any direction. What Tucker did not realize was that the bugling originated not from an elk, but from another group of hunters positioned on the opposite ridge. These hunters, inexperienced with traditional calling techniques, had been experimenting with a new elk calling application on their smartphone, producing sounds that were convincing enough to fool even seasoned hunters at a distance. As Tucker navigated the increasingly unstable terrain, his right foot struck a particularly loose section of shale. The rock gave way beneath his weight, sending him tumbling several feet down the slope. He felt his knee twist violently as he attempted to break his fall, the ligament tearing with a sharp pop that sent waves of pain through his leg. The injury left Tucker temporarily immobilized, but his immediate concern shifted when he noticed movement in the thick brush above his position. A large black bear, estimated at over 300 pounds, had been attracted to the area by the elk scent lure Tucker had applied to his backpack earlier that morning. The bear had been observing Tucker's descent and now viewed him as either a threat or a potential competitor for territory. Tucker, carrying his trusted Browning X-bolt chambered in .300 Winchester Magnum, attempted to ready his weapon as the bear began its approach. The animal moved with surprising speed for its size, closing the distance between them in seconds. Tucker managed to fire a warning shot into the air, the report echoing off the canyon walls, but the bear only hesitated momentarily before continuing its advance. In his haste to chamber another round, Tucker lost his grip on the rifle, which clattered down the slope and came to rest against a fallen log several yards away. The bear, now within striking distance, reared up on its hind legs, displaying its full, intimidating height. What followed was 20 seconds of pure survival instinct. Tucker, despite his injured knee, managed to grab his aluminum trekking pole and began jabbing at the bear while screaming at the top of his lungs. The noise and aggressive defensive posture confused the animal, which had expected either submission or flight. The bear made several swipes with its massive paws, leaving deep scratches on Tucker's jacket and drawing blood from his left shoulder. Eventually, the combination of Tucker's aggressive defense and the continuing echo of his shouts throughout the canyon prompted the bear to retreat. The animal, more puzzled than frightened, gradually backed away into the dense undergrowth and disappeared. Tucker, bleeding and barely able to stand, managed to retrieve his rifle and fire 3 emergency flares from his backup signal pistol. The bright orange smoke rising above the canyon caught Kevin Holt's attention, who had been searching for his uncle after hearing the initial gunshot. A rescue helicopter evacuated Tucker to a hospital in Missoula, where he received treatment for a torn interior, cruciate ligament, multiple puncture wounds, and severe bruising. During his recovery, Tucker reflected on the series of decisions that had led to his near-death experience. He later stated that he had violated the fundamental rule he emphasized to every client: never hunt alone. That single choice, driven by overconfidence and the excitement of the hunt, had nearly cost him everything he held dear. In the winter of 1994, the eastern regions of Finland presented a landscape of pristine wilderness that had remained largely unchanged for centuries. Kari Nieminen, a 45-year-old logger from Suomussalmi, had spent most of his adult life working in these forests. His weathered hands and keen understanding of wildlife patterns made him one of the most successful hunters in the region. Nieminen had learned his skills from his father, who had taught him that the taiga demanded respect and constant vigilance. His hunting companion, Lari Jokela, was a 38-year-old trapper who supplemented his income by guiding tourists during the brief summer months. Jokela possessed an almost supernatural ability to read animal signs and had never returned from a hunting expedition without bringing back game. The two men had maintained their friendship since childhood, bonding over shared experiences in the wilderness. Their annual Capercaillie hunt had become a tradition that neither man would consider abandoning. The large grouse, weighing up to 6 kilograms, provided excellent meat during the harsh winter months. More importantly, the hunt represented a connection to their ancestral way of life that modern Finland seemed increasingly eager to abandon. The expedition began on December 15th, with temperatures dropping to minus 25 degrees Celsius. Nieminen and Jokela had established their base camp approximately 15 kilometers from the nearest logging road, in a clearing that offered protection from the prevailing winds. Their canvas tent, reinforced with additional insulation, provided adequate shelter for what they planned as a 5-day hunting trip. The first 2 days proceeded as expected. The men located fresh capercaillie tracks in the snow and identified several roosting areas in the dense pine groves. They observed the typical wildlife that inhabited these forests during winter: Arctic foxes, snowshoe hares, and the occasional glimpse of a lynx moving silently through the underbrush. On the third morning, however, something had changed. The forest had fallen unnaturally silent. Niminen, who had spent decades listening to the subtle sounds of the wilderness, immediately noticed the absence of bird calls that normally punctuated the winter air. Even the wind seemed to have stilled, creating an atmosphere of oppressive quiet that neither man had experienced before. Jokela discovered that the animal tracks they had been following from the previous day appeared to loop back on themselves, creating impossible patterns in the snow. The tracks indicated that the birds had been moving in circles, behavior that contradicted everything both men knew about capercaillie movement patterns during winter months. That evening, as they prepared their meal over a small camp stove, both men heard sounds that defied logical explanation. Human-like whistles echoed through the forest, seeming to come from multiple directions simultaneously. The sounds were not random but appeared to follow a pattern, almost like a primitive form of communication. Niminen suggested that the sounds might be coming from other hunters in the area, though he acknowledged that no one else had registered permits for this particular section of forest. Jokela expressed doubt about this explanation, noting that the whistle seemed too organized and purposeful to be casual communication between hunters. The following morning brought a discovery that shattered both men's rational explanations for the strange events. Niminen awoke to find his shotgun missing from its position beside the tent entrance. The weapon, a reliable over-under model that had belonged to his father, had been carefully placed against a pine tree the previous evening, according to his usual routine. A thorough search of the surrounding area revealed only Niminen's footprints leading from the tent to the spot where the shotgun had been positioned. There were no signs of animal interference, no drag marks in the snow, and no indication that the weapon had been moved by natural forces such as wind or settling snow. Jokela, while helping with the search, made a discovery that would haunt both men for years to come. A series of human footprints circled their campsite, but these tracks were unlike anything either man had seen before. The prints were narrow and elongated, pressed unusually deep into the snow as if made by someone of extraordinary height but minimal weight. The depth of the impressions suggested that whoever had made them had been moving very slowly and deliberately, taking careful steps to avoid making noise. The prints formed a complete circle around their tent, indicating that someone or something had been observing them for an extended period during the night. Both men packed their equipment immediately and began the trek back to their vehicle. Neither spoke about what they had experienced until they reached the safety of Suomussalmi. Years later, Niminen would still insist that he had glimpsed something tall and pale moving between the trees as they departed, though he could never provide a clear description of what he had seen. The residents they spoke with about their experience were notably reluctant to discuss the area where they had been hunting. Several older residents mentioned that hunters had reported similar experiences in that section of the forest, leading most to avoid the area entirely. They referred to the presence as the Silent One, though none would elaborate on the origins of this name. During the autumn of 1986, the high desert regions east of Rock Springs, Wyoming, presented a landscape of stark beauty that had remained largely unchanged since the frontier era. Dean Callahan, a 39-year-old machinist from Casper, had been bow hunting these ridges for over 15 years. His methodical approach to tracking and his patience with waiting for the perfect shot had earned him a reputation among local hunters as someone who rarely returned empty-handed. Callahan had learned his skills through trial and error, developing an intuitive understanding of mule deer behavior. The mule deer rut season in Wyoming typically occurs during late October and early November, when mature bucks become more active and less cautious as they compete for breeding opportunities. Callahan had been monitoring a particular area where he had observed signs of a large buck with an impressive rack estimated to span nearly 30 inches. On October 28th, Callahan established his base camp in a sheltered draw that protected him from the constant wind that swept across the high desert. His equipment included a Hoyt compound bow with a 65-pound draw weight, carbon arrows tipped with broadheads, and camouflage netting that would help him blend into the rocky terrain. The first 3 days of hunting proceeded according to Callahan's carefully planned strategy. He had identified the buck's preferred routes between feeding and bedding areas, noting that the animal followed a consistent pattern of movement during the early morning and late afternoon hours. The deer's tracks indicated an animal of substantial size with hoofprints that measured nearly 4 inches in length. Callahan employed various hunting techniques to increase his chances of success. He constructed ground blinds using natural materials, positioned them downwind from the deer's expected path, and used wind gauges to monitor air currents that might carry his scent to the sensitive animals. His patience and methodical approach had served him well in previous hunting seasons. On the 4th day, however, Callahan made a decision that would alter the course of his hunting trip dramatically. While preparing his evening meal, he had shot a jackrabbit that had wandered close to his camp. The animal provided fresh meat and represented a welcome change from his usual trail rations. After field dressing the jackrabbit, Callahan disposed of the entrails by throwing them into a nearby ravine, approximately 50 yards from his established hunting trail. He reasoned that the remains would decompose naturally and provide food for scavengers, a common practice among hunters in the region. The following afternoon, Callahan was tracking the large buck when he unknowingly circled back toward the area where he had disposed of the rabbit remains. The entrails had attracted several species of scavengers, including ravens and coyotes, but had also drawn the attention of a predator that Callahan had not considered: a mountain lion. The adult female cougar, weighing approximately 120 pounds, had been feeding on the remains of rabbits when Callahan's approach disrupted her meal. Mountain lions in Wyoming typically avoided human contact, but this particular animal had been defending a food source and viewed Callahan as a threat to her territory. The attack occurred without warning. Callahan was moving slowly through the rocky terrain, his attention focused on reading deer signs in the sandy soil, when the mountain lion launched itself from a ledge approximately 12 feet above his position. The animal's powerful hind legs propelled it through the air with remarkable speed and accuracy. The cougar's claws raked across Callahan's back as he instinctively dropped to the ground and attempted to roll away from the attack. His heavy canvas jacket provided some protection, but the animal's claws penetrated the fabric and inflicted deep scratches across his shoulder blades. The mountain lion's weight, combined with the force of its leap, knocked Callahan forward onto his hands and knees. Callahan's years of hunting experience had taught him to remain calm during unexpected encounters with wildlife, but the ferocity of the attack temporarily overwhelmed his rational thinking. He scrambled to reach his compound bough, which had fallen several feet away when the mountain lion struck. Still, the animal maintained its aggressive posture and continued to swipe at him with its powerful forepaws. In desperation, Callahan grabbed one of his carbon arrows from the quiver attached to his belt. The broadhead tip, designed for maximum penetration when hunting deer, proved effective as an improvised weapon. He thrust the arrow toward the mountain lion's neck, making contact with the animal's throat area. The cougar recoiled from the unexpected pain and released its grip on Callahan's jacket. The animal backed away several feet, assessing whether to continue the attack or retreat to safety. Blood from the arrow wound was visible on the mountain lion's neck, but the injury did not appear to be life-threatening. Callahan, bleeding from multiple scratches and partially disoriented from the shock of the attack, managed to regain his footing and retrieve his bow. He nocked another arrow and drew the string back, preparing to defend himself if the mountain lion renewed its assault. The standoff continued for several tense minutes before the cougar finally retreated into the rocky terrain. The walk back to his truck required nearly 4 hours, during which Callahan used duct tape from his equipment kit to seal the deepest wounds on his back and shoulders. He fashioned a compression bandage from his spare shirt and used a nylon strap as a makeshift tourniquet to control bleeding from his left arm. At the hospital in Rock Springs, medical staff treated Callahan's injuries with antibiotics and required sutures for the deeper lacerations. The attending physician noted that the scratches were consistent with a mountain lion attack and advised Callahan that he had been fortunate to escape without more serious injuries. During his recovery, Callahan reflected on the series of decisions that had led to his encounter with the mountain lion. He acknowledged that disposing of the rabbit remained so close to his hunting area had created an attractive scent trail that had drawn predators to the vicinity. The experience taught him valuable lessons about the interconnected nature of wildlife behavior and the importance of considering all potential consequences of his actions in the wilderness. In February 2014, the mountainous interior of Tasmania represented one of Australia's last true wilderness areas, where dense, temperate rainforests and rugged highlands created an environment that had remained largely unchanged for millennia. Miles Reardon, a 33-year-old carpenter from Hobart, had been hunting the Tasmanian highlands for over a decade. His methodical approach to tracking and his deep respect for the wilderness had earned him a reputation among local hunters as someone who understood the complexities of hunting in Tasmania's challenging environment. Reardon had learned to read the subtle signs that indicated deer movement patterns and had developed an almost intuitive understanding of how weather conditions affected animal behavior. The area where Reardon planned to hunt was located approximately 60 kilometers southeast of Launceston, in a region characterized by dense eucalyptus forests interspersed with areas of native grassland. The terrain featured steep ridges and deep valleys carved by ancient glacial activity, creating a landscape that was both beautiful and treacherous for inexperienced travelers. On February 14th, Reardon established his base camp near what appeared to be a seasonal creek bed that had been reduced to a series of stagnant pools by the summer drought. The location offered several advantages: protection from prevailing winds, access to water for camp use, and a commanding view of the surrounding forest that would allow him to observe deer movement patterns. His equipment included a recurve bow with a 55-pound draw weight, wooden arrows fletched with natural feathers, and camouflage clothing designed for the specific vegetation patterns of the Tasmanian highlands. Reardon preferred traditional archery equipment over modern compound bows, believing that the simpler technology enhanced his connection to the hunting experience. The first day of hunting proceeded normally, with Reardon observing typical wildlife activity throughout the forest. He spotted several wallabies moving through the underbrush, heard the distinctive calls of various bird species, and noted fresh deer tracks in the soft soil near the creek bed. The sounds of the forest created a familiar symphony that indicated a healthy ecosystem functioning according to natural patterns. However, on the second morning, Reardon immediately sensed that something had changed. The forest had fallen into an unnatural silence that he had never experienced during his years of hunting in Tasmania. The usual chorus of bird calls was absent, and even the constant rustling of small animals moving through the undergrowth had ceased entirely. The absence of sound created an oppressive atmosphere that made Reardon increasingly uncomfortable as the day progressed. He had learned to trust his instincts during his years in the wilderness, and every sense was warning him that the forest was not functioning according to its normal patterns. Even the wind seemed to avoid the area, creating a stillness that felt almost supernatural. Despite his growing unease, Reardon decided to continue with his planned hunt. He had invested considerable time and resources in the expedition, and the rational part of his mind insisted that the unusual quiet was probably a temporary phenomenon caused by weather conditions or natural predator activity that would resolve itself within a day or two. That evening, as Reardon prepared his meal over a small camp stove, he began to hear sounds that defied logical explanation. Human-like voices seemed to whisper through the forest, speaking in what sounded like words but in a language or dialect that he could not identify. The voices seemed to emanate from multiple directions simultaneously, creating an echo effect that made it impossible to pinpoint their source. Reardon armed himself with a powerful flashlight and systematically searched the area surrounding his camp. The beam revealed nothing but the familiar shapes of trees and undergrowth, yet the whispering continued intermittently throughout the night. His attempts to record the sounds with his mobile phone proved unsuccessful, as the device's microphone failed to capture anything beyond the ambient noise of the forest. The following morning brought a discovery that shattered Reardon's rational explanations for the strange events. Every arrow from his leather quiver had been removed during the night and arranged in a perfect circle around his tent. The arrows were positioned with their points facing outward, creating a pattern that suggested deliberate human intervention rather than random animal activity. A careful examination of the ground around his tent revealed no footprints, paw prints, or any other indication of how the arrows had been moved. The soil was soft enough that even the lightest footsteps would have left visible impressions, yet the area appeared undisturbed, except for the precisely arranged arrows. Reardon's electronic equipment began to malfunction in ways that he could not explain. His GPS unit, which had functioned perfectly during the journey to his campsite, now displayed erratic readings that placed his location hundreds of kilometers from his actual position. The device's compass feature spun continuously, unable to establish a consistent bearing to magnetic north. Even his mechanical compass, a reliable instrument that had served him faithfully for years, began to behave erratically. The needle rotated slowly in continuous circles, pausing occasionally at seemingly random points before resuming its aimless movement. The malfunction was particularly disturbing because mechanical compasses were generally immune to the electronic interference that might affect GPS devices. The air in the forest had acquired an unusual quality that Reardon found difficult to put into words. A persistent odor of damp stone and decomposing vegetation permeated the area, although he had detected no such smell during his initial assessment of the campsite. The scent was not unpleasant, but seemed out of place in the dry eucalyptus forest. Reardon's psychological state deteriorated rapidly as the inexplicable events continued. His years of wilderness experience had taught him to remain calm in unexpected situations. Still, the combination of sensory anomalies and equipment malfunctions created a level of stress he had never experienced before. He found himself constantly scanning the forest for movement, jumping at every sound and unable to concentrate on the hunting activities that had brought him to the area. On the third morning, Reardon decided to abandon his hunting expedition and return to civilization. He packed his equipment hastily, leaving behind several essential items for his journey home. The drive to Launceston took nearly 3 hours, during which he reflected on the series of unexplained events that had driven him from the forest. During the months following his experience, Reardon continued to hunt in other areas of Tasmania, but never returned to the region where he had encountered the strange phenomena. He consulted with other hunters and wilderness guides, but none could provide a rational explanation for what he had experienced. His equipment functioned normally in different locations, suggesting that the malfunctions had been specific to that particular area of the forest. Reardon's experience continued to be a source of fascination and frustration for him. As a practical person who prided himself on his ability to understand and adapt to wilderness conditions, he struggled to accept that some aspects of his experience defied logical explanation. He continued to hunt regularly, but never again felt completely comfortable when camping alone in remote locations. In late September 2008, the boreal forest north of Sudbury, Ontario, presented a landscape that had been shaped by centuries of logging, mining, and natural regeneration. Brandon LeClaire, a 44-year-old electrician from Sudbury, had been hunting moose in these forests for over 20 years. His understanding of moose behavior patterns and his ability to read the subtle signs that indicated their presence had made him one of the most successful hunters in the region. LeClaire had learned his skills from his father, who had passed down techniques refined through generations of hunting in the Canadian wilderness. His son Lucas, a 19-year-old college student studying forestry, had accompanied his father on numerous hunting trips, but had never successfully harvested a moose. The young man possessed good shooting skills and understood basic hunting principles, but lacked the experience necessary to accurately read animal behavior and predict movement patterns. The 2008 moose season in Ontario opened on September 22nd, with hunters required to obtain special licenses and tags that were allocated through a lottery system. LeClaire had been fortunate to receive tags for the hunting zone north of Sudbury, an area he knew well from previous seasons, and where he had observed substantial moose activity during his summer scouting trips. On September 28th, the two men established their hunting camp approximately 30 kilometers from the nearest paved road, in an area characterized by mixed forest interspersed with marshy areas that provided ideal moose habitat. The terrain featured numerous small lakes and beaver ponds connected by seasonal streams, creating a network of water sources that attracted moose during their daily feeding routines. Their hunting strategy involved constructing an elevated platform in a large oak tree overlooking a known wallowing area where bull moose had been observed during the rutting season. The stand, built from lumber carried to the site over several trips, provided an excellent vantage point for observing moose movement while keeping the hunter's scent above the animal's detection range. The first morning of hunting produced encouraging results when LeClaire successfully called in a young bull moose using a birch bark horn that replicated the low-frequency calls used by moose during mating season. The animal approached within 40 yards of their position before detecting some subtle indication of human presence and departing the area. Lucas had been unable to get a clear shot at the departing moose, though he later admitted that excitement had affected his ability to aim accurately. The experience provided valuable lessons about the importance of remaining calm under pressure and the necessity of practicing shooting from elevated positions before attempting to harvest large game animals. On the second morning, LeClaire again successfully attracted a bull moose to their hunting area. The animal, estimated to weigh over 600 pounds with an impressive rack spanning nearly 50 inches, approached their stand with the characteristic swagger that indicated a dominant male during rutting season. The moose's behavior suggested that it was responding to what it perceived as a challenge from a rival male. However, the bull became suspicious when it failed to locate the source of the calling and began to circle the area in an attempt to identify the intruder. The animal's keen sense of smell and acute hearing made it extremely difficult to fool for extended periods, and LeClaire recognized that they would need to adjust their strategy if they hoped to achieve success. The decision to relocate proved to be a critical mistake that would have serious consequences for both hunters. LeClaire suggested that they should move deeper into the marsh to position themselves along the bull's probable escape route, reasoning that they could intercept the animal if it attempted to leave the area through the dense cover of the wetland. The terrain in the marsh was challenging, with areas of deep mud concealed by seemingly solid vegetation. Both men wore insulated waders that provided protection from the cold water, but limited their mobility and made it difficult to move quietly through the reeds and cattails that dominated the wetland environment. As they crested a small rise that provided a view of the surrounding marsh, both men suddenly found themselves face to face with a cow moose and her calf. The adult female, estimated to weigh approximately 800 pounds, had been feeding in a secluded area of the marsh when the hunter's approach disturbed her and her offspring. A cow moose with calves represents one of the most dangerous encounters possible in the Canadian wilderness. The maternal instinct to protect their young makes female moose extremely aggressive toward any perceived threat, and their size and strength make them capable of inflicting fatal injuries on humans. Unlike bulls, which typically retreat when confronted by humans, cows with calves will often attack without warning. The cow moose's reaction was immediate and devastating. She lowered her head and charged toward the hunters with surprising speed for such a large animal. Her powerful legs propelled her across the uneven terrain of the marsh, and her determination to protect her calf overrode any natural fear of humans that might have prompted retreat. LeClaire attempted to make himself appear larger and more threatening by raising his arms above his head and shouting, techniques that wildlife experts recommend for deterring aggressive moose. However, the cow's maternal instincts were too strong to be deterred by intimidation tactics, and she continued her charge without hesitation. The impact knocked LeClaire backward into the soft mud of the marsh, where the cow moose continued her attack by striking him repeatedly with her powerful hooves. Each blow delivered tremendous force, and the animal's weight created devastating impacts that LeClaire was powerless to prevent or deflect. Lucas, witnessing his father's predicament, found himself paralyzed by the speed and ferocity of the attack. He had his rifle ready and could have fired at the cow moose, but later admitted that he had been terrified of hitting his father, who was directly beneath the attacking animal. The fear of causing friendly fire casualties prevented him from taking action that might have ended the attack more quickly. The cow moose's assault continued for approximately 30 seconds before Lucas managed to overcome his paralysis and began making loud noises while waving his arms. His actions finally convinced the cow that the threat to her calf had been eliminated, and she retreated with her offspring into the dense cover of the marsh. LeClaire sustained serious injuries during the attack, including 2 broken ribs and a cracked pelvis that required immediate medical attention. The rescue operation involved a helicopter evacuation from the remote marsh, complicated by the challenging terrain and the need to transport LeClaire without causing additional injury to his damaged ribs. During his recovery in the hospital, LeClaire reflected on the series of decisions that had led to his encounter with the cow moose. He acknowledged that his focus on bull moose during the hunting season had caused him to overlook the possibility of encountering cows with calves in the same area. The experience taught him valuable lessons about the importance of considering all potential wildlife encounters when planning hunting strategies. The incident had a profound impact on Lucas, who struggled with guilt about his inability to react more quickly during the attack. Counseling sessions helped him understand that his hesitation had been a rational response to a complex situation where any action carried significant risks. The experience ultimately strengthened the bond between father and son as they worked together to process the trauma and learn from their mistakes. In mid-November 1977, the Brooks Range of northern Alaska represented one of the most remote and challenging hunting environments in North America. Clyde Rasmussen, a 41-year-old petroleum engineer from Fairbanks, had been hunting in Alaska for over 15 years. His experience with extreme weather conditions and his mechanical aptitude had made him one of the few hunters willing to venture into the remote regions of the Brooks Range during the brutal winter months. Rasmussen understood the risks involved in Arctic hunting, but believed that proper preparation and equipment could overcome most challenges. His cousin Jared, a 38-year-old heavy equipment operator from Anchorage, had accompanied Clyde on several previous hunting expeditions, but had never ventured into the Brooks Range during winter conditions. Jared possessed excellent survival skills and had extensive experience with snowmobiles and Arctic equipment, making him an ideal partner for the challenging expedition they had planned. On November 16th, the two men departed from Fairbanks aboard snowmobiles equipped with cargo sleds containing their hunting equipment, camping gear, and emergency supplies. The journey to their intended hunting area required nearly 8 hours of travel across increasingly challenging terrain, with the final portion involving navigation through mountain passes that were barely passable even under ideal conditions. The first day of hunting exceeded their expectations when they located a small group of caribou and successfully harvested a mature bull. The animal, estimated to weigh over 400 pounds, provided enough meat to justify the expedition, while leaving them free to pursue additional animals if opportunities arose. The success boosted their confidence and reinforced their belief that proper planning could overcome the challenges of Arctic hunting. However, on the second day, weather conditions began to deteriorate rapidly. The temperature dropped to -25 degrees Fahrenheit, accompanied by increasing wind speeds that created dangerous wind chill factors. More ominously, weather reports indicated that a major storm system was approaching from the west, bringing the potential for blizzard conditions and visibility reduced to near zero. The storm's arrival was preceded by a dense ice fog that rolled across the landscape like a living entity. This phenomenon, common in Arctic regions during extreme cold, occurred when warm air masses encountered the frigid surface temperatures, creating a fog composed of tiny ice crystals that reduced visibility to mere feet. The fog was so dense that objects became invisible at distances of 10 feet or less. The ice fog's arrival caught both men by surprise as they had been traveling across what they believed was familiar terrain. Within minutes, their ability to navigate was completely compromised, and they found themselves unable to determine their location or maintain their planned route. The GPS devices they carried became unreliable in the extreme conditions, and their compass readings were confused by the metallic components of their snowmobiles. The situation became critical when both snowmobiles began to experience mechanical problems related to the extreme cold. The carburetors, which mixed fuel and air for the engines, began to freeze due to moisture in the fuel system. Despite their mechanical knowledge and preparation, neither man had anticipated the specific combination of extreme cold and humidity that created the carburetor icing problem. Stranded in an unmapped basin surrounded by steep ridges, the two men faced a survival situation that would test every skill they had learned during their years in the Alaska wilderness. Their emergency supplies included a two-person Arctic tent, sleeping bags rated for extreme cold, and enough food for several days. However, the combination of equipment failure and severe weather created circumstances that demanded immediate action. The construction of their emergency shelter required several hours of work in brutally cold conditions. They located a natural depression in the terrain that provided some protection from the wind and began excavating a snow cave that would offer superior insulation compared to their tent. The work was exhausting in the thin air and extreme cold, but both men understood that their survival depended on creating adequate shelter. The first night in their snow cave was characterized by sounds that neither man had expected to encounter in the remote wilderness. Wolf howls echoed across the basin, seeming to come from multiple directions simultaneously. The calls were not the distant sounds of wolves traveling through the area, but rather the closer communications of a pack that appeared to be investigating their presence. Rasmussen, armed with a Remington 700 rifle chambered in .30-06, fired a warning shot into the air in an attempt to discourage the wolves from approaching closer to their shelter. The gunshot echoed off the surrounding ridges, creating a series of reverberations that amplified the sound far beyond its original intensity. However, the warning shot did not have the intended effect. The wolves continued to circle their position, and both men could see the reflection of eyes in the darkness beyond the range of their flashlights. The pack's behavior suggested that they were not merely curious about the human presence, but were actively assessing whether the men represented a threat or potential prey. The second night brought a repetition of the wolf activity, with the pack maintaining their surveillance of the humans' position. The animals' persistence was unusual, as wolves typically avoided human contact unless driven by extreme hunger or territorial concerns. The sound of their movement through the snow created a constant reminder of their presence, preventing either man from achieving restful sleep. On the third day, a search and rescue helicopter equipped with thermal imaging equipment located the stranded hunters. The rescue operation required several hours due to the challenging weather conditions and the difficulty of landing in the confined space of the basin. Both men were evacuated without serious injury, though they required medical treatment for mild frostbite and exhaustion. During his recovery, Rasmussen reflected on the experience and acknowledged that the Arctic environment had taught him valuable lessons about the limits of human preparation and technology. He later stated that while the extreme cold had been challenging, the presence of the wolves had reminded him that humans were not always the dominant predators in the wilderness. The experience changed his approach to Arctic hunting, emphasizing the importance of emergency planning and the unpredictable nature of wilderness survival situations.